Hey, what's going on, everybody? Brent Hyden here, coming at you on this frigid Friday morning, talking tonight's 10-game slate around the association. Before we dive into a healthy slate, quick reminder, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below. That way you get notified every single time I post a brand new video. If you happen to stumble across this video and you're not already following me on Twitter, make sure you head over to the Twitter machine. My Twitter handle at BrentHyden1 is in the description down below. While you're over there, send me a direct message to find out how you can get access to my daily content, projections, Discord chat, and all that good stuff for an affordable one-time price that carries you all the way through the playoffs. Also, if you're more interested in a monthly subscription, I do have my Patreon set up, my Patreon account, patreon.com/Brent Hyden. Link is in the banner above and also in the description down below. But without further ado, let's take a look at the games. First game, we are going to talk about Denver heading to Charlotte to take on the Hornets. Denver 1-point favorites in this game, 218.5 over under. Marvin Williams is questionable, and Gary Harris is going to be out for this game. A couple quick notes on some other guys. Murray has topped 20 points in 4 of the past 5 games, averaging 17.9 points per game. Nikola Jokic averaging 14 assists over the past 2 games and has posted 7 outings of 10 or more so far this season. Jeremy Lamb notched his 5th career double-double last game and has scored in double digits 16 times already this season. But with Gary Harris out, we do get an opportunity to take a look at some usage and fantasy production without Harris on the floor and also without Will Barton. Nikola Jokic, 1.64 fantasy points per minute, 32% usage rate. Jamal Murray, 27% usage rate, 1 fantasy point per minute. It's not a great matchup here for Jamal Murray, but it's worth noting over 40 minutes in back-to-back games. Obviously, the Orlando game was an overtime game, but again, would have been over 40 minutes. Gets an increased chance for some assists, and obviously his minutes are slightly more secure. I do like Jamal Murray a decent amount here, coming off obviously a really good game against Orlando. Going to take a few extra shots and things like that. He's fine in tournaments. 7,100 on DraftKings, 7,400 on FanDuel. Like I said, perfectly fine in tournaments. Charlotte does rank 3rd in defensive efficiency, 2-point guards. So that actually, again, makes me just want some exposure to him in tournaments. I do love Nikola Jokic in this spot. Charlotte ranks 22nd in defensive efficiency to centers on the season. They're giving up 24 points, 16 rebounds, and 54% shooting. Absolutely fantastic option in all formats. He clocks in at 9,300 on DraftKings, 9,500 on FanDuel. That's pretty darn appealing tonight. Taking a look at Nikola Jokic, coming off again, just a couple of really, really solid games. Over 10 assists in back-to-back games. He's more than likely going to get you 40 in the mid 40s, but we do have upside here, especially in a very positive matchup. So Nikola Jokic perfectly fine in all formats. Beasley and Craig, both of them got a significant amount of run in the last game. Both guys are at least interesting here because they're really, really, really cheap. We have Beasley coming in at 3,500, Torrey Craig coming in at 3,300. I think I prefer Malik Beasley in this spot. We saw Beasley get 31 minutes last game. We saw Craig get 25 minutes last game. I think Beasley profiles as the better option. If I'm playing on DraftKings, I would rather just avoid that entire situation. But if you're building a bunch of lineups, you can definitely get some exposure to one or the other. Again, I do lean Beasley a little bit here. Charlotte does rank 29th in defensive efficiency to shooting guards. It's allowing them to shoot 48% from the floor, 38% from 3. 17% of Beasley's field goal attempts this season are corner threes, so he does get a little boost there because Charlotte is allowing 40% shooting on corner threes. He's a much better play on FanDuel, where he's 3,700. If he doesn't get the run or doesn't produce, you drop his score. Juancho's perfectly fine in all formats. Charlotte allowing 1.08 points per possession on spot ups. Hernan Gomez spotting up 40% of his possessions this season. 20% of his possessions are corner threes. I am a decent fan of Juancho Hernan Gomez tonight. has really found his footing recently, has scored over 20 fantasy points in 5 straight games. Really starting to look a little bit better and does have some upside in this matchup. So Hernan Gomez, a decent way to get exposure for a very affordable price across the industry. Millsap, I still really like Millsap as a cash option, 1.24 fantasy points per minute with those guys off the floor coming in at 6,400 on DraftKings. Very, very solid option here. 6,400 on FanDuel. I do like him a decent amount. Does have plenty of upside. We've seen him over 30 minutes in 3 straight games, which is very, very appealing. Looking at the Charlotte side of things, I don't really have a whole lot of interest in Charlotte tonight. There are better places, I think, to look. That being said, Kemba Walker, obviously a great tournament option, leads the team in usage, clocking just under 30% on the season. Has struggled a little bit over the last 3 games. One of those games against New Orleans where he did hurt his ankle. Did not look right after that happened, but over his last 3 games, or 5 games actually, shooting just 17% from 3-point range, 36% from the floor. Not the greatest of matchups here for Kemba Walker. Obviously, Denver without Gary Harris does not have the perimeter defense that they normally do. So Kemba Walker coming in at 8K on DraftKings, really, really appealing tournament option. 8,700 on FanDuel. Again, somewhat appealing in tournaments there. Lamb and Batum are fine. Again, Charlotte just really does not jump off the page as a really, really solid team to target here. We saw Nick Batum in a really good matchup last game. If you read the notes, you would have seen that I was all over him against Minnesota. Had a really solid game. I'm going to say he would be mostly just a cash play here in case people are chasing that big game. I'd rather look elsewhere, though. Again, just not really a very good spot here tonight for anyone from Denver or from Charlotte. If you look over at the projections here, no one really projects to be that good of an option here. Kemba Walker coming in as like the best projected player. It's not really a good spot here for them tonight. So let's move on to the next game. We're going to talk about Philly at Detroit. Lots to talk about in this game. Going to be one of my favorite games to get some exposure here. Looking at the Philly side of things, that's where we're going to start. Philly favored by 2 in this one, 220.5 over under. It is worth noting that Reggie Bullock and Ish Smith are out for this game. Andre Drummond has really struggled recently, has failed to record a double-double in each of his last 2 games, averaging just 11.5 points and 7 rebounds. It's probably going to be a 3rd straight game here tonight as Joel Embiid basically owns all of the real estate in Andre Drummond's head. Has completely just demolished him over the last 2 games, has dropped 64.3 and 65.8 fantasy points in back-to-back games, has topped 30 points in 3 of his 5 total matchups against Andre Drummond. Detroit has really struggled against centers, ranking 25th in defensive efficiency. They can't defend the rim. This is just God, it's such an amazing spot for Joel Embiid. And you also have, of course, the narrative. Joel Embiid at 10-1 is just ridiculously cheap in this matchup. Joel Embiid at 10-7 on FanDuel. I still love him over there. He is going to be a core option for me tonight. I rarely call a pay-up option a core play, but yeah, Joel Embiid, a core option for me tonight. I do like Ben Simmons a decent amount in this spot as well. We've seen Detroit really struggle to defend the rim. Opponents are shooting 69% against them at the rim. Nice. Ben Simmons takes 70% of his shots at the rim. Obviously has the triple-double upside. This is a really good spot for Ben Simmons. Only 8,300 on DraftKings. That's really, really appealing. He's been consistent, getting, double-digit rebounds or assists. Most games can obviously score in double figures. I really, really like this spot for Ben Simmons tonight. He's 9,100 on FanDuel. More of a tournament option there. But on DraftKings, I think he's cash and tournament viable at just 8,300. Again, just a really, really, really good spot here for him. Jimmy Butler's fine. 7,400, really, really appealing for Jimmy Butler. Again, Detroit, they're also really struggling to defend in the mid range. 41% of his shots come in the paint or the mid range. Detroit allowing 42% in both paint attempts and mid range attempts. So yeah, he's fine in tournaments. 7,400 on DraftKings, pretty appealing as a tournament option there. JJ Redick is, of course, always fine in cash. 5,400 on DraftKings, 5,500 on FanDuel. Price just never seems to go up, and he did struggle against Washington. Only played 19 minutes in that game. It was a monster blowout, but just really, really freaking consistently getting you in the mid 20s with 30 fantasy point upside. I do like JJ Redick as a cheaper way to get exposure here. I don't really love Wilson Chandler, Mike Muscala, any of these guys. But like if they fit your lineup, I wouldn't use Muscala on FanDuel, but like Wilson Chandler, you can use him if you wish. Wilson Chandler is never going to be that appealing. On the Detroit side of things, with Ish and Bullock out, it's going to open up some minutes for a few guys. Looking at my favorite option here, however, it's going to be Blake Griffin. You can use him. You can use Drummond in tournaments if you wish. Obviously, narrative against Embiid. Maybe he comes out and stops playing like utter garbage. That being said, I still really, really want some Blake Griffin exposure here. Blake Griffin continues to lead the team in usage at 29%. One of the only productive members of this team recently. Philly really struggling to defend high usage power forwards. They're ranked 26th in defensive efficiency to the position. They're giving up 22.8 points and 13.4 rebounds to the position, and 48% field goal shooting. Blake Griffin, again, continues to be a really solid option, has eclipsed 40-plus fantasy points in 3 of the last 4. Without Bullock and Ish on the floor, 34.7% usage rates. Just such a great spot here for him. That usage is really, really tough to overlook. I love Blake Griffin, going to be another core option for me in this spots here. So right now it looks like Blake and Embiid, 2 guys that I'm going to be building my lineups around for sure. Again, core option for me. That doesn't mean you have to make them a core option for you. They're just a core option for me, so take that for what it's worth. Reggie does see a little bit of a usage boost as well with both Bullock and Ish Smith off the floor. He's in a pretty good spot. Philly has really struggled against point guards since the Covington Butler deal. They've allowed 8 different point guards to top 30 fantasy points against them. They do rank 25th in defensive efficiency to point guards over the last 10 games. Reggie Jackson, pretty appealing. Coming in at 5,300 on DraftKings, 5,500 on FanDuel. I think he's cash safe and has some tournament upside as well. We've seen him, hit that 30 fantasy point mark a few times, even in limited minutes because of blowouts and things like that. So Reggie Jackson, pretty intriguing option here. I do like him a significant amount, especially now that his minutes are a little bit more secure with Ish Smith being off the floor because of the shortened rotations. Langston Galloway on FanDuel at just 3,500, a perfectly fine punt option here. Bruce Brown could get some extra run. Did play 26 minutes against Milwaukee, didn't really produce, but Bruce Brown at 3,400, just a name to keep an eye on. I do think he has some upside, especially at 3,600 on FanDuel. Again, you can punt shooting guard over there pretty easily tonight. Bruce Brown on DraftKings, if you're building a handful of tournament lineups, at least someone to keep an eye on here. Stanley Johnson would be the other name to really keep an eye on here. Did play 27 minutes against Milwaukee, 20 fantasy points, coming in at 4K on DraftKings and 4,100 on FanDuel. I do have some interest in Stanley Johnson tonight. Should see even a few more minutes with Bullock and Ish Smith out, and would be a pretty solid play tonight. I would like him a little bit more if he is coming off the bench and not in the starting lineup. He is spotting up on almost 36% of his possessions, and Philly allowing 1.11 points per possession on spot ups this season. He is also taking about 19% of his shots in the mid-range. Philly is very, very open to letting you get any shot that you want in the mid-range this season. Moving on, Indiana at Orlando. Orlando 1-point favorites in this one. 206.5 over under. Victor Oladipo, the only real injury news that we have here tonight. Looking at the Indiana side of things, Tyreke Evans has started all 8 games in place of Oladipo. Really struggled though, just averaging just 9.4 points on 31.3% shooting. He was averaging 11.2 points per game on 40% shooting in his 15 games off the bench. Obviously, he has been a big disappointment since Oladipo went down. Looking at Vucevic, had 24 points, 15 rebounds against Denver, has made at least 50% of his shots for his 11th straight game. That's pretty damn solid. Collison has really stepped up with Oladipo being out, averaging 12.4 points, 8.2 assists, and 3 steals over his last 5 games, shooting 5 of 7 from three-point range over the last 2. Collison is a guy that I do have a decent amount of interest in here tonight. It is a pretty good matchup for him. But with Oladipo off the floor, just a quick glance at the usage and production for some of these guys. Tyreke Evans, 28.1% usage rate, just 0.99 fantasy points per minute. Domantas Sabonis, 25.5% usage rate, 1.46 fantasy points per minute. Myles Turner, 22% usage rate, 1.16 fantasy points per minute. Bojan Bogdanovic, 22% usage rate. Darren Collison, 18% usage rate, but averages 1 fantasy point per minute. I do have, again, a decent amount of interest in the Indiana side of this thing. Tyreke Evans, I will continue to use him in tournament lineups. He is cheap. He's $5K on DraftKings, $5,100 on FanDuel. He has let everybody down every single time they've gone to the well with him. Eventually, the shots are going to come. Like, the shots are going to fall. Like, he's not going to continue to shoot like utter garbage. He continues to be a fantastic tournament option because he does have monster upside. But at this point, I can't use him in cash games. 63.2% of his shots, or Orlando is allowing 63.2% shooting at the rim. 46% of his shots come at the rim. So this might not be the night that he rectifies things, but again, in tournaments, I still really like using some Tyreke Evans. Just don't tilt off a cliff whenever he doesn't have a good game. Just know that it's going to happen at some point. Again, I mentioned Collison has been absolutely on fire over the last 5 games. Price is coming up, $6,600 on DraftKings, $6,700 on FanDuel. Still a really solid cash game option. Orlando ranks 23rd in defensive efficiency to point guards. They're allowing them to shoot 46.1% from the floor, 37.7% from 3. I still really like Darren Collison in this spot. Just has been really solid recently without Oladipo, so he is a fine cash game option. Turner and Sabonis, both fantastic options in this spot. Turner does project a little bit better than Sabonis based on I have him just for more minutes. Orlando is really struggling to defend the roll man in the pick and roll. They're allowing 1.24 points per possession. 40% of Turner's possessions are as the roll man. 30.5% of Sabonis possessions are as the roll man. Both guys perfectly fine in cash and tournaments. I do lean towards Sabonis personally just because I'm more of a Sabonis fan, but I think he has higher upside just given his role off of the bench, more touches and things like that. But either option perfectly fine in all formats. You can sprinkle in some Corey Joseph or some Thad or some Bogdanovic wherever you want to. None of these guys jump off the page as great options, but I mean, if you want to get some more exposure, that's fine. Looking at the Indiana side of things, Indiana does rank second defensive efficiency to centers. They are allowing 15 rebounds and 52% shooting to the position. Obviously, Vucevic, a really solid option, has been outstanding recently, leads the team in usage, leads the team in touches. There's really nothing to not like about Vucevic in the spot, unfortunately. For me, he's just going to be a tournament option because I do love Embiid, and there's some more centers that I really, really like Jokic, and a couple other guys that we're going to get to. Perfectly fine in tournaments here. Indiana does struggle against pick and roll point guards, allowing 0.94 points per possession to the position. Augustine, about 40% of his possessions come in the pick and roll. Augustine, really, really cheap option to get some exposure here. Most nights going to get you 20 plus fantasy points. I like him in cash. Indiana allowing 38% on 3-point attempts, which is makes Fournier, who is attempting 43% of his shots from three, a great tournament option. He is second on the team in usage, coming off a really, really solid game against Denver. 5,500 on DraftKings is pretty affordable here tonight. Looking at FanDuel, he is 5,800, so pretty fair price there. And then Terrence Ross continues to be a really, really good cash game option. 5K on DraftKings, 5,500 on FanDuel. Just consistently getting you in the mid to low, or the low to mid 20s with a little bit of upside. I do like Terrence Ross as a really, really solid cash game play. And then Aaron Gordon is fine in tournaments. Moving on, Toronto at Brooklyn. Toronto 9-point favorites in this game. 222.5 over under. No real injury news to talk about outside of the normal, Karis LeVert and Norman Powell stuff. Although Norman Powell is slated to come back here pretty soon. Leonard averaging 33.5 points on 54.5% shooting over the last 4 games. Really a whole lot to like with Toronto here. Brooklyn's giving up just 111 points, 111.5 points per game, but they're just getting destroyed by big men, giving up 15.9 second chance points. Really, really high field goal percentage in both the paint and the mid range. 41.2% in the paint, 43% in the mid range. Their rim protection numbers have started to come down a little bit. Serge Ibaka, one of my favorite options here tonight, coming in at a very affordable 6,200 on DraftKings, 6,600 on FanDuel. 15.8 points on 58% shooting and 5.2 rebounds per game over his last 5. 46% of his shots come in the mid-range, in the paint or the mid-range. Really, really solid option here tonight. I do have a lot of interest in Serge Ibaka. Again, I mentioned 6,200 on DraftKings, 6,600 on FanDuel. I expect him to bounce back here tonight, and I expect him to play a decent amount of minutes here as well. So Serge Ibaka is someone to really, really consider here. I do like Siakam as well. I still prefer Serge Ibaka here, but Siakam at 6K, 6,300 on FanDuel is a perfectly fine option. And it's worth noting, Brooklyn allowing 1.35 points per possession to the roll man. That's about 24% of Ibaka's possessions. Jonas Valanciunas coming off a monster game. Just outplayed Ibaka in the last game. 4,600 on DraftKings. He is 5,100 on FanDuel. He's fine in tournaments. I just don't expect him to get more than 18 minutes tonight. So he's someone that is going to have to do his damage in limited minutes, but against Brooklyn, it definitely could happen. Kawhi leads the team in usage, 30%. Since he sat out I believe it was November 21st game, Leonard has averaged 29.6 points on 51.8% shooting, 38.6% from 3, to go along with his 9.1 rebounds per game. He's basically a safe 40 fantasy points most nights with upside. It's a really, really good spot for Kawhi Leonard, coming in at 9,700 on DraftKings, 10-2 on FanDuel. The issue that I have here is that I just can't afford him with me wanting to get some Embiid and some Blake Griffin. But, I mean, you're going to get Kawhi Leonard at probably low ownership tonight, and I do like him a decent amount if you can afford him. Lowry, Van Vliet, Green, guys that can really be, sprinkled into tournament lineups. I think Green is a very, very interesting tournament option at 4,300 on DraftKings and 4,400 on FanDuel. None of those guys really jump off the page. I'm mostly focusing on the big men and Kawhi tonight. Flipping over to the other side, I don't like usually taking guys against Toronto, but it is worth noting D'Angelo Russell last 10 games averaging 19.8 points on 40% shooting, 6.5 assists per game, usage rate over 30% over that span. Operates as the pick and roll ball handler about 40% of the time this season. Toronto allowing 0.97 points per possession to the pick and roll ball handler. His last 2 games against Toronto, obviously this was before Danny Green and before Kawhi Leonard were there, but has scored 48.3 and 56.8 fantasy points. Something about his matchup with Toronto, he really likes just torching Toronto. And I actually pulled it up. I think he actually has more than one. I think over his entire career, he's actually torched the Raptors. Yeah, over his last 5 games. That's all he's played against them. 30.8, 15.3, so 2 bad games, and then 45.5, 48.3, and that 56.8. So D'Angelo Russell coming in at just 6,900. Nice. On DraftKings. Kind of like him taking a tournament shot on some D'Angelo Russell here. He's 7,400 on FanDuel. Again, more of a tournament play, but definitely don't hate taking a shot there. You can look at Dinwiddie. He's fine as a cash option off the bench. 5,800 on DraftKings, 6K on FanDuel. I do like him more coming off the bench. Jared Allen, generally a guy that we like to take against more stationary big men, so having Serge Ibaka in the starting lineup is probably going to hurt him, but he's perfectly fine in tournaments. And then 35% of Rondé's field goal attempts come in the mid-range. Toronto allowing 41.7% shooting in the mid-range. He's fine as a tournament option. 5,100 on DraftKings, 5,400 on FanDuel. Rondé Hollis-Jefferson, just 1 of 9 from the floor with 6 total points over his last 2 games. Has been struggling a little bit. Moving on, let's take a look at Sacramento at Cleveland. Sacramento 3-point favorites in this one, 221.5 over under. Lots to talk about here. Marvin Bagley is questionable. Zizic is questionable. Decker and Nwaba should be out. Or Nwaba is for sure out in this game. Decker, I believe, should be out as well. Colin Sexton, 14 straight games scoring in double figures. Tristan Thompson averaging 16 points and 16 rebounds over his last 2. Sacramento has looked really solid. Sacramento playing at a really fast pace. This should be a faster paced game. Looking at the Sacramento side of things first, obviously the status of Marvin Bagley is going to play a pretty big impact on this game. We could see more Shumpert, more Jackson, more Scal if Bagley is out. Looking at it, I think Scal has actually got some run the past couple games, just a few minutes without him. But we've seen Harry Giles get in there. We've seen Bielitsa get in there for a couple extra minutes. We've seen Jackson pick up some extra minutes. They do a really good job of just sprinkling minutes around, so no one really benefits that much. Cleveland ranks 30th in defensive efficiency to point guards. They got absolutely torched by Curry last game, but they're allowing them to shoot almost 50% from the floor and almost 40% from 3. I do love De'Aaron Fox in all formats, 7,700 on both sides. De'Aaron Fox, a guy I will continue to go back to the well on every single night, has been disappointing of late. The assist numbers and the rebounding numbers have been down a little bit for Fox in several of these games, but he's still scoring in double figures. Shooting has picked up just a little bit outside of that Indiana game. He's perfectly fine in all formats. 43.1% or Cleveland is allowing opponents to shoot 43.1% on corner threes. 20% of Iman Shumpert's field goals are corner threes. Iman Shumpert, very interesting value option here, 3,700 on DraftKings. He is also just 3,800 on FanDuel. It is a revenge game for Shumpert. There you go, but still seeing well over 20 minutes most nights. Again, would see a few extra minutes potentially with Bagley being out as the rotation gets a little bit shorter. In Cleveland, obviously playing a crap ton of guards. Makes it a pretty good spot for Iman Shumpert as a value play here tonight. Cleveland giving up 14 fast break points and 1.32 points per possession in transition this season. Hield operating in transition on 25% of his possessions. Cleveland allowing shooting guards to shoot 44% from the floor. Buddy Hield perfectly fine in cash and tournaments, 6,200 on DraftKings. He is 6,200 on FanDuel as well. Over 30 fantasy points in back-to-back games. Field goal attempts are definitely going to be there for him. Was really, really good to see him get over 30 fantasy points in just 18 minutes against the Suns. That was just a monster blowout. But I still like Buddy Hield a decent amount here. Bogdan perfectly fine in all formats. 44% of his shots come from three. Opponent shooting 36.1% from three against Cleveland. You can definitely get some Bogdan at just $6K on DraftKings and $6,800 on FanDuel. Willie Cauley-Stein, another really good tournament option here, but not someone that I have a ton of interest in tonight. 66% of his shots do come at the rim. Cleveland allowing 69.4% shooting at the rim. Again, there's a lot of really, really good center options, so it's going to be hard to prioritize Willie Cauley-Stein over all of them, but in tournaments, you're building a bunch of lineups, I would definitely get some Willie Cauley-Stein exposure. Looking at the other side, I normally wouldn't want to have Colin Sexton or George Hill in my lineups, but given how fast this game is probably going to play, both of them are interesting GPP options. 56% of Sexton shots come in the paint or the mid-range, with 33% of them coming at the rim. Looking at Sacramento, 66% shooting allowed at the rim, 40.7% shooting allowed in the paint, 41.7% shooting allowed in the mid-range. And I did mention Colin Sexton has scored in double figures in 14 straight games. I guess he's cash viable in this spot. Still going to play a decent amount of minutes. 4,900, that's pretty appealing for Colin Sexton. You can roll him out in cash. Yeah. George Hill, revenge game, 3,700, 3,900 on FanDuel, perfectly fine if you want some value exposure to this game. He has not been very, very good outside of, just hasn't been very good, period. He's been playing a lot of minutes, and that's about it, but someone that you can consider. Clarkson, perfectly fine in all formats. Tristan Thompson, this is a fantastic matchup for him. 7,300 on DraftKings, 7,800 on FanDuel. Dude's just going absolute bananas. As I mentioned, like 16 points, 16 rebounds is what he's averaging over the last 4 games. That's insane. Yeah, perfectly fine in cash in tournaments. Again, it's really, really hard to get exposure to him at that elevated price tag, but he's justifying it, continues to pay that off on a nightly basis. So it's a fantastic matchup with Sacramento struggling to defend the rim, Sacramento giving up a lot of rebounds, a lot of points in the paint, a lot of second chance points. Tristan Thompson probably going to smash again tonight. Chetty Osman's fine in cash, still playing a decent amount of minutes. Price is really appealing here. And then Alec Burks, still a really, really good value option. Taking a look at him, 4,100 on DraftKings, 4K on FanDuel. Did not play very well against Golden State, but just shooting a ton whenever he's getting on the floor, playing in the mid-20s minutes. So it is a pretty good spot here for him tonight. Moving on, let's take a look at Oklahoma City at Chicago. OKC, 8.5-point favorites in this one. 216.5 over under. Bobby Portis is doubtful. Chris Dunn is out for this game. Denzel Valentine out as well. Russ is Russ. Really doesn't take a whole lot for me to, I don't need to tell you guys that Russ is a good play here. Chicago ranks 28th in defensive efficiency to point guards. If you can afford to play Russ, you play Russ. That's all it really comes down to. 11-4 on DraftKings, 11-3 on FanDuel. Paul George coming off a monster game against the Nets. Chicago is allowing opposing small forwards to shoot 44% from the floor, 36% from three. Pretty big boost for Paul George. Chicago also ranks 22nd in the NBA in turnovers per game. They're turning the ball over 15 times per game. That is a big boost to Paul George. He has 7 double doubles this season. Paul George, um, still perfectly fine in cash, perfectly fine in tournaments. Most nights going to get you over 40 fantasy points. Again, it's going to be hard to pay for him given how my personal lineups are going to shake out, but he is fine in all formats. Chicago really getting blasted by centers, giving up a lot of rebounds. They're giving up 49.4 rebounds per game, allowing 43% shooting in the paint. That makes Steven Adams a fantastic option. 7K on DraftKings, 7,700 on FanDuel. I do love him in cash games. Jeremy Grant, really solid cash game option as well. 4,500 on DraftKings, going to get you more than 20 fantasy points most nights. Going to play more than 30 minutes most nights. So Jeremy Grant in a very good spot. 5,400 on FanDuel. I still like him in cash. 45 again on DraftKings. Really solid value and a great way to get some exposure to the Oklahoma City side of this game. On the flip side, since the return of Markkanen, Zach LaVine's usage rate has plummeted to 23.2%, still averaging 21 points and 6 assists per game in those 2 outings. OKC does struggle against shooting guards this season. That being said, Zach LaVine, just a tournament option for me tonight. I don't really care to target the Chicago side of this game on a 10-game slate where I can find plenty of really solid options tonight. Markkanen, fine in tournaments, draws a really tough matchup, but has been solid in the 2 games since coming back. He's 6,300 on DraftKings, 6,700 on FanDuel. Again, just tournaments only. Parker coming off the bench is fine in tournaments. I'm still waiting for that price to come down just because the minutes are going to start coming down, but the usage rate is higher off the bench. But 6,700 on FanDuel, that's a definite fade for me. 6K on DraftKings. Borderline tournament option here. Justin Holiday is perfectly fine in cash at 5,700 on DraftKings and 5,900 on FanDuel. Just going to play a ton of minutes. Going to take double-digit field goal attempts, can get you some rebounds, some steals, things like that. We do know Westbrook, a guy that can turn the ball over a decent amount. So Justin Holiday, really the only cash exposure to this game that I really care to get. And yeah, let's move on to a much more appealing game. Memphis, New Orleans. New Orleans 5-point favorites in this one, 217 over under. Chandler Parsons, Dylan Brooks are out. Mirotic no longer on the injury report. Pelicans enter play on Thursday, second in the NBA in offense at 118.7 points per game. Grizzlies second in the NBA in defense at 102.3 points allowed per game. Marc Gasol coming off of a game where he was held to 1 of 13 shooting for just 4 points against the Clippers. Don't expect that to happen tonight. I have a lot of interest in the Memphis side of this game mostly. Pelicans giving up 116.5 points per game. They're playing super fast. Mike Conley, the guy that I have the most interest in here tonight. Pelicans ranked 26th in defensive efficiency to point guards on the season. They've allowed 28.2 points, 47% shooting, 41% from 3. 36% of Conley's field goal attempts are 3-pointers. Another 26% of his field goal attempts coming at the rim, where New Orleans is allowing almost 64% shooting. Has been absolutely smashing recently. Over the last few games, pulling up his player card. The last four games, last 10 days, 25 points per game, 4.8 rebounds, 6.3 assists, 46.6 fantasy points, shooting 45.5% from the floor and 37.5% from 3. The minutes are really appealing here for Mike Conley. If he's going to play 36 to 38 minutes against his Pelicans team, he's a core option for me again. So that is now 3 guys that are core options for me with Joel Embiid, Mike Conley, and Blake Griffin. Again, core options for me do not mean that you have to make them core options for yourself, but for me, they are guys that I'm going to be building my lineups around. I do really like Garrett Temple as a value option with exception to the Clippers game, I believe it was. Has still been playing a ton of minutes, gotten some foul trouble against the Clippers, but 31 against Philly, 43 against Brooklyn, 31 against Toronto. Gonna get you 20 plus fantasy points most nights at 3,800 on DraftKings and 4,100 on FanDuel. One of my favorite value options here. Has eclipsed 30 minutes, 8 of the last 10, has eclipsed 20 fantasy points in 6 of the last 10. 14% of his field goal attempts are corner threes. New Orleans allowing opponents to shoot 44% on corner threes. Temple, excellent in transition as well, averages 4.3 points per game in transition. New Orleans allowing 1.22 points per possession in transition. Jaren Jackson Jr., really solid tournament option. Obviously, foul trouble, a little bit of concern. Hopefully they don't put him at the 5 trying to defend Anthony Davis, but it's a possibility that they do that. But he's still going to have his hands full trying to defend Mirotic and Julius Randle. I still really like Jaren Jackson Jr. in a decent matchup in tournaments, but again, just tournaments, not so that you can feel comfortable with in cash. I do love Marc Gasol in this spot, 8,100 on DraftKings, down to 9K on FanDuel. He was over 10K just a couple days ago against the Clippers on FanDuel. New Orleans struggles on post-ups, allowing 1.05 points per possession. Gasol operating on post-ups 27% of the time. Had to double-check my notes. Looking at his games against Davis, I had it pulled up here. Let me pull this up one more time. He has actually been has not been great against Anthony Davis over the last 3 seasons. 39.8 DraftKings points, had a monster 71 fantasy point outing, 47.5, 28.5, 41.3, 32.8, and then one game where he played 20 minutes, only had 7.5 fantasy points. Without looking, I would assume some of those games obviously came without Mike Conley in the lineup because Conley was injured. I do still have a lot of interest in Marc Gasol here tonight. Looking at the rest of this team, Kyle Anderson is fine. It's Kyle Anderson. Shelvin Mack projects to be a really solid game option. Marshawn Brooks in tournaments, especially at like 3,600 on FanDuel, 3K on DraftKings. You can sprinkle some Marshawn Brooks in there if you wish. Memphis, just a really, really, really good team to get some exposure to tonight against the Pelicans. I don't really care to target too much of the New Orleans side of this game. Anthony Davis has historically struggled against Marc Gasol, pulling up his games against Gasol over the last 3 seasons. Does have 3 games where he did actually perform pretty well. 61 fantasy points December of 2016, 57 in October of 2017, and 57 in April of last year, but the games in between 28.3, 34.3, 35.8, 43.5. Obviously, it's Anthony Davis. You can roll him out if you wish. I'm going to be looking elsewhere, though, especially at 11K. Drew Holiday, again, continues to be a guy where we can pretty much project him for right around 40-plus fantasy points most nights. You can roll him out if you so wish. Mirotic is fine in tournaments. Randall, not someone I have a lot of interest in because he is expensive, but again, in tournaments, if you're building a bunch of lineups, you can get some Randall exposure. Moving on, Lakers at Spurs. San Antonio, 1.5 point favorites in this one. 226 over under. Rounding third base here. Just 3 games left to go. Ingram is out. Rondo is going to be out for this game. LeBron James averaging 36.3 points, 8 rebounds, and 8 assists against the Spurs this season. Kyle Kuzma, shockingly, has topped 20 points in 4 of his past 6 games. I don't know that people are paying a whole lot of attention to that, but looking at the Lakers side of this game first, without Ingram, without Rondo on the floor, LeBron James, 36% usage rate, 1.63 fantasy points per minute. If I'm paying up for a stud not named Joel Embiid, it's going to be LeBron James. But the rest of this team, Lonzo Ball, 1 fantasy point per minute. Kyle Kuzma, 0.91, but a 25% usage rate. Beasley, Stevenson, JaVale, all these guys see some production without Rondo and Ingram on the floor, but I don't really trust any of those guys too terribly much. We will see. Um, we will see Josh Hart and KCP, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, pick up the bulk of minutes. Josh Hart actually started the second half um, in place of Ingram last game. I do have a lot of interest in Josh Hart here. He was someone that I was kind of targeting last game as a value option, but 3,600 on FanDuel, 3,600 on DraftKings. Pretty solid spot here for him. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, again, really solid spot for him. 3,900 on DraftKings, 3,700 on FanDuel. Either one of these guys are in play here. I lean towards Josh Hart a little bit more. Does average 0.82 fantasy points per minute without Rondo and without Ingram on the floor. And his ability to get out in transition does help him a little bit here as well. Taking a look at his shot profile, 59% of his shots come from three, 46% of them are above the break threes. The Spurs allowing 37% shooting on above the break threes. They're allowing opponents to shoot almost 65% at the rim, where Josh Hart takes 33% of his shots. So Josh Hart, the guy that I have the most interest in. If you're looking at one of the value options here, I did mention Kuzma. Really solid option here. Again, has topped 40 fantasy points in 3 straight games. I do like him in cash and GPPs. And then Lonzo Ball. I talked about him a significant amount last game against the Spurs. I really liked him in that matchup. He comes in at just 5,700 on DraftKings, 6,700 on FanDuel. A great tournament option here. San Antonio, again, allowing really high percentage shots on above the break threes and at the rim. That basically accounts for pretty much all of Lonzo's shots this season. Flipping over to the San Antonio side, Lakers giving up 47 rebounds and like 58.9 fantasy points per game to centers. LaMarcus Aldridge coming in at 7,600 on DraftKings. He is, let's see, what is his price over on FanDuel? 8,400 on FanDuel. Struggled against the Lakers last game, struggled against Utah. I did mention that I expected him to struggle in the last game against the Lakers because it was a back-to-back, and he has been really bad in back-to-backs this season. But averaging 42 fantasy points per game against this team, I really like him now that they're back on their home court. It's not a back-to-back. LaMarcus Aldridge, a great option here. Lakers do rank 28th in defensive efficiency to shooting guards on the season. They've allowed him to shoot 44% from the floor. DeRozan has just gone bonkers against his team. Did struggle a little bit last game. That being said, has been basically averaging 60 fantasy points per game against this team. Last game was 48 fantasy points, but just taking a ton of shots, high usage guy. This is a good spot here for DeMar DeRozan. I do like him. 18% of his possessions are in isolation. The Lakers allowing 1.02 points per possession in isolation. DeMar DeRozan, a great way to get some exposure to this game. You can sprinkle in Forbes, Mills, Derek White, wherever you wish. None of those guys really jump off the page. There's still excellent value options here tonight, though, but there's probably better ways to go. Rudy Gay, great option all formats, has just been outstanding against the Lakers, averaging 39.9 fantasy points in 33 minutes in 3 games against the Lakers this season. I do love him in all formats, 5,900 on DraftKings, 5,800 on FanDuel. Again, Lakers giving up 1.02 points per possession in isolation. About 20% of Gay's possessions are in isolation. He is a great mid-range way to get some exposure to this game. Looking at the next game, Miami-Phoenix, 6.5 point favorites for Miami. Was not a total on this game last time I looked. Let me double check one more time. 210 is the total on this one, and it has moved to Miami favored by 8 now. We do have some injury news to talk about here. Goran Dragic is questionable. I expect him to play in this game. Booker, Warren both out. Hassan Whiteside and Wayne Ellington not with the team. They are out for personal Whiteside and Ellington on the floor. Bam Adebayo, 1.13 fantasy points per minute. James Johnson, 1.11, 24.5 usage rate. Only 10 minutes for him. But Josh Richardson, Dwayne Wade, Goran Dragic, all guys with really, really high usage rates and solid fantasy production. Kelly Olynyk, 1.04 fantasy points per minute. It is a revenge game for Goran Dragic. I do have some concern, obviously, about projecting him for a lot of minutes in this spot, given that he's coming off of injury. We'll need to keep an eye on that. But perfectly fine in cash and tournaments, again, averaging 1.05 fantasy points per minute with everybody off the floor. Phoenix ranks 24th in defensive efficiency. That's probably like 30th now, given how Damian Lillard just put up like 400 fantasy points against them in the first half of last night's game. Bam is going to be a core option for me, coming in at 4,200 on DraftKings, 5,500 on FanDuel, but he's power forward on both sites. I absolutely love him here. Going to play center. Phoenix ranks 28th in defensive efficiency against centers. Again, 1.13 fantasy points per minute. Bam Adebayo, going to be chalk. I'm perfectly fine with eating the chalk there. Kelly Olynyk has been playing really well at 20 plus minutes in 4 straight, has eclipsed 28.5 fantasy points in 3 straight. I'm fine with some Kelly Olynyk here. Again, 1.04 fantasy points per minute. Excellent matchup for him. If you're wanting to pivot off of Kelly Olynyk, you can get some James Johnson exposure in tournaments as a GPP play. You can also get some Richardson, Winslow, Magruder. These guys all project to be pretty solid cash game options. Winslow projecting to be the better option of the two, coming in at 4,300 on DraftKings, 4,900 on FanDuel. I am fine with some Justice Winslow in cash and tournaments. Richardson, again, fine in cash or fine in tournaments. And then Dwayne Wade, someone that you can consider here. But I'm mostly looking at Adebayo and Kelly Olynyk. It's not a spot I want to get a ton of exposure to, given that the Suns are just really, really bad, and they're getting destroyed. Like they've scored like 9 points in back-to-back first quarters. Like that's really bad. On the Suns side of this, you can use Ayton in tournaments. 24.7% usage rate, 1.02 fantasy points per minute without Warren and Booker. You can use Akobo and Melton. They're going to play pretty similar minutes. Neither is like a great option. There's just no reason to force Phoenix exposure here. There's just really not. Like, you don't know what you're going to get. Like, in tournaments, fine. Jackson continues to dominate usage, like 30% usage rate. There's just no reason to get overly excited about this Phoenix team. They're just so bad. Like, they are just so bad. Like, there's better places to get value. There's better places to get minutes, especially in cash games. If you're building a bunch of tournament lineups, you can get some Jackson, you can get some Akobo and Melton and some of these guys, but yeah, there's just so many better places to go. Let's move on to Golden State, Milwaukee. This game, let's pull up the total here, is a pick'em, 240 over under. Draymond Green is questionable. Chris Middleton is back, and Ersan is questionable. I would kind of be shocked if Draymond Green suits up, but it's looking like he does have a chance. I was under the impression that he was a little bit further away than media is leading on right now, but we'll have to wait and see on that. Stephen Curry, 15 of 24 from three-point range over the last... holy shit, Joel Embiid is out tonight. Damn it! Wow, okay, so that just ruins everything. Crap. Let me finish this game. Durant, 19 of 29 from the floor last 2 games, has totaled 17 assists, 15 rebounds. Jerebko has been on a hot streak, 18 of 25 from the floor over the last 4 games. Bledsoe has been really solid over the last 3 games. But with Green, if Green is out, Curry, 43.5% usage rate, 1.65 fantasy points per minute. Durant, 37.6% usage rate, 1.57 fantasy points per minute. I do love Curry in all formats. The Bucks giving up like 36 3-point attempts per game. Curry should just light them up. He has been on fire. I do really like him across the industry. He comes in at 10K on DraftKings, 9,900 on FanDuel. Really, really good spot for Curry. Shooting guards against Milwaukee are shooting 37% from three. Klay Thompson, yeah, 50% of his field goal attempts are in the paint or the mid-range. Milwaukee allowing 45% shooting to opponents in both of those areas. The other 38% of his shots come from three. Again, mentioned Milwaukee giving up a lot of three-point attempts. I do like Klay Thompson in pretty much all formats. You can use Durant as well. Price has gone down despite playing really, really well. Great spot for him in tournaments. Looney's fine in cash. Jerebko and Bell are fine in tournaments. If Draymond Green is ruled out, Looney has been seeing a boatload of minutes, and there is a little bit of narrative. He had like a jersey retirements, hometown stuff. So Looney, perfectly fine in cash and tournaments if Draymond Green is ruled out. Looking at Bledsoe, on the Milwaukee side of things, coming off really, really solid outings, has eclipsed 40 fantasy points in both. Perfectly fine cash and tournament option tonight. Giannis, I don't have a lot of interest in him, actually, especially if Draymond Green is back. But Giannis has just really struggled against the Warriors historically. It is worth noting 66% of his shots come at the rim, where Golden State is allowing 66.6% shooting. Again, if Draymond Green is out, I have more interest in Giannis. That being said, he's just a tournament option for me tonight. Looking at the rest of this team, 23% of Brogdon's field goal attempts are in transition. Golden State defense does lack in transition. I really like Malcolm Brogdon in cash and tournaments. Continues to be a really solid producer across the board. Only 21 minutes against Detroit, but still 24 fantasy points. Has been putting up really solid games, over 30 fantasy points in a significant amount of his games recently. So Malcolm Brogdon, a great way to get some exposure to this Milwaukee side of this game. You can look at Brook Lopez, Chris Middleton as tournament options. Even someone like Pat Connaughton in tournaments tonight. But since we did get the Philly news, let me go ahead and take a look at the 76ers usage this season with Joel Embiid off the floor. Obviously, we need to take Fultz, Covington, and Saric off the floor as well. And let's see what happens here. JJ Redick, 37.4% usage rate. Jimmy Butler, 35% usage rate. Ben Simmons, 25% usage rate. Interesting. JJ Redick, 1.45 fantasy points per minute. Jimmy Butler, 1.45 fantasy points per minute. Ben Simmons, 1.29 fantasy points per minute. Those three guys, all three of them, really, really, really solid options here. And that's going to open up minutes for Mike Muscala. And Mike Muscala and maybe Amir Johnson. I'll cover the rest of that and in Discord. Also gonna make Andre Drummond a little bit safer option here tonight. But now that that's all out of the way, that's gonna do it for me today. I will be back tomorrow. We do have another pretty large slate tomorrow, which is Saturday. Good luck in all your contests tonight.